Now you were going to talk about...
In the dining room, there was a Danish modern dining table that I'm pretty sure they got when they moved into the house and kept the whole time. I'm pretty sure it was the same one. Danish modern dining table and chairs. And when we were pretty little, there was a tiny little kid-sized table in the kitchen, and the kids ate at that table. The adults ate at the big dining table. I would say probably until we were maybe 5 or 6, something like that. And there was one really funny memory that the story ended up inspiring a song. But one Saturday, Aunt Marjorie was out somewhere, and Uncle Lamar was watching football, sitting in front of the TV in the living room. And Thomas and Jan and I were all at the kids' table in the kitchen. And we decided to help ourselves to Kool-Aid and saltine crackers. And the Kool-Aid was made in this big gallon-sized milk jug, which was a little much. I think we were about 4 at the time. It was a little much for 4-year-olds to pour. And we were pouring into paper cups that were about this big, little Dixie cups. And not knowing to hold on to the cup when you pour out of a gallon size of Kool-Aid, we kind of help each other to pour. And when it hits the cup, of course, it just falls over and spills all over the table. And we thought it was hilarious. So it turned our saltine crackers purple. It was grape Kool-Aid. And so we pulled out more saltine crackers and we dumped out more Kool-Aid. We thought it was so fun and so hilarious. And so then we just started splashing in it like it was a fun little water activity or something like that. All of a sudden, Uncle Lamar gets up from his football game in the commercial, comes around the corner into the kitchen to get another beer, and just has this most horrified look on his face. Quiet, reserved man all of a sudden is really excited and says, "What's going on in here?" And we all dashed out, ran to the basement, and spied on him with our pretend wooden block walkie-talkies till he had it all cleaned up and was sitting back down in his chair. So years later, cut to the Mishke Sanfords, band that I was in Chapel Hill in the late 80s, early 90s, nursery rock band. And we wrote a song called Lamar about the incident. And some of the lyrics say, the chorus says, "Lamar's gonna whip your tail. He's getting out a mop and a pail. You shouldn't have dumped out crackers and grape Kool-Aid, 'cause you know that Lamar is not the maid."
Amen. I don't know. I'm kind of moved. I don't know what else to say about that. That's kind of... I remember that video. I was sitting here thinking about that video, how well we got that Kool-Aid look on that white table. We get that red and blue and it became purple.
And then to mix the red and blue.
That mop bucket rolled right to me right over to him at the camera when I threw it. It went brrr. That was pretty cool.
Good moments in that video.
I think per Herbert, Dottie, if you wouldn't mind doing the masturbation thing with your finger that we appreciated so much, but doing the finger pointing a little lower so that we capture it, if you wouldn't mind.
Don't go out of the frame.
No higher than your head.
Yeah. Yeah, because we have
Gosh, I don't even remember using my finger. Oh, okay. Yes, I do.
Well,
yes, I do.
How else
Okay.
is one supposed to masturbate?
Okay, gotcha.
Bam! Nobody's going to acknowledge my joke. Come on.
I like that 3-finger thing.
I gotcha.
It was like the teacher, like...
That's right, yeah. Teach them to, right.
Teach them to
Yeah. Okay, do I need to tell the whole story
No,
again,
God,
or just
no.
that part?
No, just
Okay.
and just the punchline.
So she's telling the story, and she said, "So I just spoke up and I said, teach them to masturbate. I'm serious. Teach them to masturbate. That will solve the problem." I don't know if that did it.
Yeah.
Or if that was too
What do you
expressive.
think, Jason?
I think we're getting audio cock-blocked by this guy mowing the lawn
I
down
hear
the
it too,
street.
yeah.
Should I cut and we can discuss?
He ain't gonna quit anytime soon.
No, I know he's not. Are we have further places to go with Miss Dottie in this?
Should I go ahead and talk about what our plans are for the house after it's renovated?
Yeah.
Tell just a
absolutely.
little bit about that,
Yep.
just to make it clear. Gosh, now we got leaf blowing too.
I think that's just a mower.
That's a mower. I know there was
A mower.
over.
Okay. All right. Once the house is, I don't like to say renovated, updated. That's what I'll say. Once the house is updated and the lawn, a little bit of clearing out and just freshening of the lawn, our plans for the house, I'm really excited to say, we want to keep the house. This is not a flip house project. Want to keep it in the family so that our family can continue to entertain here and enjoy the house. And then also offer it for rent, for use as artists in residence, corporate rentals, Airbnb, rental during the High Point Furniture Market, which is a really good rental use, and just keep it. I like to think we keep it forever. And I was telling my son, Arrow, who's 10, I was telling him this, and he said, "Oh, Mommy, that's great. I'm glad you want to keep it. You're not flipping this house." He goes, "You know what, though? My kids are probably going to want to sell it." I said, "No, hopefully not."
Miss Dottie, I have a question about the architecture. Is this architecture, as opposed to other types of architecture, is it somehow more conducive to artists and to like vibrant living? Just the architecture kind of forces that, or maybe helps that kind of, when you live in this, it kind of, I don't know, it has more of an effect on, or is that going nowhere?
No, that's a great question.
Well, that goes back to the study of architecture, right? And why it's so important as a
I think-
study.
And people
Yeah.
that are going to visit this are going to really get something out of this more than just staying at an exotic, interesting place. They're,
Right.
when you see the function and the form meeting, it really just comes alive, right?
It does. I think that really touches on several different things. I think from a purist aspect, minimalism, you're not distracted by a lot of bells and whistles and accoutrement, decor. You're not distracted by a lot of things. So you almost are in touch with your most pure self, almost a higher self. It's also a very innovative space. And I think anytime you're in an innovative space, that an architect and or designer, in which they were thinking out of the box when they designed it, I think the person inhabiting the space is also likely to think that way while they're there. And then it also really puts you in touch with nature. Very common in mid-century modern houses. The front of the home, for privacy, either has very few windows or maybe windows up high to let a little bit of light in. And then the back of the home is very open to nature, as this house is. So it really brings nature in. And I feel like nature is often very inspiring to artists as well.
Is there anyone else in the family, an artist or an architect, other than you and Lamar?
My grandmother, who was married to the architect, Annie Lamar Northup, was married to Willard Close Northup, and she was a painter, a really phenomenal fine art painter in her life. My Aunt Marjorie was quite a creative person. While she was more of an art historian, she, I love that later in her life, rather than taking photographs on her trips and her travels, she chose to sketch moments that she wanted to remember instead. She just did little thumbnail sketches. Those are probably the two that really stand out the most as far as art goes.
Dottie, I bet your aunt really appreciated having a skylight in the kitchen.
Yes.
It's good to have some natural light.
All the skylights were added after the tornado when the house was rebuilt.
Did your aunt and uncle ever tell you why they chose this piece of land to build the house?
I don't remember ever hearing specifically, but this is very typical of, I don't know, in the architecture and design field, you hear people refer to lots like this as a crazy architect's lot. A lot of architects take lots that other people don't see as desirable, and build and really integrate the home into the lot, make really good use of the lot's natural topography. I do think, again, while I don't really remember hearing a specific conversation, I do think Uncle Lamar chose this lot specifically because it has a creek that runs through it. And until he passed away, there was no air conditioning in this house. So the idea of a balcony that overlooked the creek, you could hear the creek running, a lot of trees on this lot, and there were more before the tornado. So the house was well shaded. It was sited well on the lot, as far as exposure to sunlight to keep it cool in the summer and warm in the winter. So I definitely think he selected this lot specifically, while a lot of people may have seen it as unbuildable.
Before they had air conditioning, did they ever use house fans in the house?
I don't really even remember house fans. I bet they did, but I don't remember house fans.
Did they use deodorant?
All natural. They used a rock salt crystal, crystal deodorant. No, I'm just kidding.
Natalie Merchant style.
Yeah, it was pretty stinky in here. Pooey.
Were your aunt and uncle vegetarians, or did they just eat regular Southern food? What kind of food did they eat?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. My aunt was never vegetarian, but my uncle later in life became a vegetarian. I remember when 4 out of 5 of my family members became vegetarians in the 80s. They used to sort of joke about it. And then in the 90s, my uncle became a vegetarian. My uncle was an original craft beer lover. And I can remember riding with my aunt many times over to the person's house that he purchased his beer from in little aluminum growlers that had a cork stopper in them to pick up my uncle's weekly supply of beer, however long it lasted. And now I look back at that and I think that was pretty innovative for the time. It was well before craft beers and breweries became popular.
Were they big cocktail fans?
I don't remember cocktail as much. My aunt to this day still loves her wine, glass of red wine in the evening. I remember I always thought it was weird that they served water with only like 1 or 2 cubes of ice in it for dinner. That was really weird to me. Now my son drinks room temperature water, and that's almost all he drinks. But they were pretty healthy. This was kind of a fun little story. My uncle was so caught up in his whole Miesian, less is more attitude and philosophy when they got married that they decided to either returned all of their wedding gifts or had a yard sale, because a lot of the things they got were silver and decorative and traditional. And my aunt tells a story that that he said, okay, let's agree that anything we want to put in our house, we both have to agree it's okay, not just one of us. And so she said she had no idea when she agreed to that he was really going to override almost everything she would suggest. But anyway, word has it that they either sold everything they got for all their wedding gifts, or they returned them for the money and traveled in Japan for several months with that money. Just was pretty radical back then.
That's way ahead of its time. I remember seeing something about that recently in the last few years where somebody said there was like a meme going around where it's like, if by some decorators where they're like, everything in your house should be like crazy awesome or it goes.
Oh, wow. How funny.
Yeah, I know that Japanese interior design manual that was a bestseller. Like, no, I mean, yeah, evaluate everything. If it doesn't, you don't love it, get rid of it.
Oh, and
Everything.
the woman who was kind of an organization freak, right?
Yeah.
Fold your clothes a certain way so you can and stack them sort of vertically in your drawers, all this stuff.
What's the longest amount of time you think you can recall that you weren't didn't visit or come back to this house, that you were apart from this house?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm going to guess it was,
I was away from this house. Blah blah blah.
probably the longest I was away from this house at any point in time was as a young adult when I was held captive by this band called the Mishke Sanfords, everybody. The Mishke Sanfords. I'm just kidding. No, probably the longest I was ever away from this house was when I was a young adult, just caught up in my own life, and our families weren't getting together as families as much anymore. My cousin Jan had young babies. She had her children at a young age. Thomas was off in the military, and I'm going to guess I may have been as long as a year maybe without coming to visit. That's terrible. May have been.
Can you estimate, is that about the longest time you've ever gone without seeing Jan or Aunt Marjorie?
I would bet so. I may not have gone a whole year without having seen them. I probably did have some times in my life where I went a year or more without seeing Thomas, because when he was in the military, they lived overseas. They lived in Arizona, and I would really only see them when they would come back to Winston-Salem.
Dottie, how close were your dad and his brother?
My dad and Uncle Lamar were close when they were young. In fact, I heard hilarious stories about them playing Army. One of my favorite stories was one where Uncle Lamar was the sergeant or general, whatever the position would be, and he was training my dad and all the neighborhood kids to be in the Army. And one of the kids was still in diapers. He was so young. And my uncle confided in my dad that in order for all of them to get their pins, he was going to say something grammatically incorrect, and anybody who laughed was not going to get promoted to the or accepted into their army or whatever it was. And he said, "Okay, Frankie, I'm going to tell you this because I don't want you to laugh. I want you to get promoted. I'm going to stand up in front of everybody, have you all lined up, and I'm going to say, 'Men, glad to have you all here together today. I really hope I learned y'all something.'" And my dad was just anticipating that so much that he was the only one who laughed when my uncle said it, so he did not get his promotion. But anyway, even the little kid in diapers didn't laugh because he didn't understand bad grammar. But my dad always told really, really fun stories of their childhood. As they got older, my dad used to refer to my uncle as a little more introverted, a little more serious, and which kind of makes sense. That's kind of typical of architects. And my dad was the kind of kid who loved to party and loved to have a good time, hung out with pretty wild, hilarious friends who always got caught. My dad just happened to not be the type who would get caught. So I think as they got older, my Uncle Lamar thought of my dad as kind of young and irresponsible and wild and sort of a partying guy. And then my parents didn't understand the whole Mies van der Rohe and mid-century modern, and I think they thought that my aunt and uncle were unique and they didn't have a whole lot in common, and that 4 years older than my dad, which meant 8 years older than my mother, was, a huge age difference. So I would say we were closest to their family, but as they got older, I'm not sure that they were super close anymore.
Dottie, you didn't used to date a rugby jumping Jew.
That's my line.
Yeah,
What
he's
time
who
is it?
broke up
No,
the
no,
machine.
no.
Past 2:30. Past the dentist time.
Past the dentist.
2:30.
2:30.
What is the dentist time?
2:30.
2:30.
2:30.
Oh,
I've never heard that
Never
before.
heard that.
2:30.
well, he's got a cure.
I came up with that. Also, it never hurts to ask unless you have laryngitis.
Never.
If you
Oh.
came up with that, I would've heard it.
2:30.
2:30.
2:30.
Never heard of it.
Should we? Do you want to cut and talk, or do you want to?
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.